The Handkerchief by Great 78. Chapter 10. Can't Get You Off My Mind. All this late-night talking. Something was off about this witch. Draco could not put his finger on exactly what it was, but things were not right. It was early September, and school had been back in session for less than a week, yet Draco seemed to see Hermione everywhere. One moment she was rushing down the hall towards the Muggle Studies classroom. The next moment he thought he caught a glimpse of her hair hurrying down the dungeon staircase towards potions class. At the meals at which he saw her, she seemed to be a blur of motion, trying to eat as quickly as possible. As someone who had spent an inordinate amount of time studying Hermione Granger, Draco could tell that something was different, though he reasoned that perhaps it was just that he was watching her, if possible, even more than usual. He had resigned himself to the fact that he was watching her, and not just because he hoped to best her in class, or because he planned to make fun of her swottiness, or to see what inane Gryffindor nonsense she and Potter and the Weasel would get up to. He finally had to admit to himself that he was watching her because she was interesting to watch. He rather enjoyed it. Truly, a lot was different this year at Hogwarts, and not just Hermione. The Dementors had shown up on the train and had never gone away. Draco found them horribly creepy, and all around god-awful. His guilt and shame at his father's role in sending Hagrid to Azkaban returned anew after his first encounter with the Dementors on the train. Being around these creatures was very much no joke, and Draco wasn't sure he could handle more than a few minutes at a time being around them. He took the piss out on Potter for collapsing, but after reliving his own mother's wails, his father's furious, sinister bellow, and his own piteous cries for mercy during the Cruciatus curse this summer, he wasn't in the best shape either. Potter had had an eventful summer, what with violating the statute of secrecy and the rules on underage magic. And yet, for all of his rule-breaking, for his punishment he had gotten a free stay in Diagon Alley. This actually was not all that different from previous years, thought Draco. The Git lived a charmed life. Weasley's family had won a small pile of gold and had promptly squandered it, which was entirely unsurprising to Draco. The eldest one at Hogwarts, Percy, according to Vince, was now head boy, so Draco made a mental note to start coming up with his insults for the Slytherin common room whilst they were all still on the platform 9 3/4. Blaise had taken Theo and 2 muggle girls to see something he called Jurassic Park that summer. Whatever they had seen at this park sounded a lot like on a telly, only far bigger. Blaise tried to explain that there was a story about large dragon-like creatures, but Theo only wanted to talk about how the muggle girls had gotten so scared that the one with him had jumped into his lap, and had seemed to enjoy snogging. Draco and the rest of the Slytherin Quidditch team threw themselves into training almost immediately. Marcus had researched ways to bulk up over the summer, so they were expected to climb stairs, do aerobic exercises, and lift heavy weights every day before breakfast. Within weeks, Draco could see a small difference, so whilst the rest of the team complained, he kept his mouth shut and appreciated the benefits. Vince and Greg had grown slightly wider over the summer. Tracy and Pansy and several of the other girls had grown boobs, but none were as big as Vince's. All of the news outlets were focused on Draco's deranged cousin, who had escaped from Azkaban. Because the man had been in prison since Draco was a baby, he had never known him, but everyone in the Slytherin common room clamoured for information, as though he and Sirius had summered on the Amalfi Coast together during his childhood. He had long ago exhausted every tiny scrap of knowledge he had, that his grandfather Cygnus and Sirius's mother Walburga were close siblings, carrying on the proud black family heritage, after their brother Alphard had turned against their pureblood ways. From the few stories that Narcissa had shared about her father, Cygnus sounded like a bit of an ass, but next to his sister Walburga, he was a total saint. Draco recalled as a very young child going to visit Great Aunt Walburga in her old age. The house had been musty and, frankly, frightening. There had been a coat rack that seemed to grab your cloaks before you even had a chance to finish taking them off. Dishes and little figurines and trinkets appeared to rattle inside dusty old china cabinets. There had been a row of house elf heads nailed to the wall, and Draco wondered what they possibly could have done so wrong as to earn that horrifying punishment. Walburga had been quite senile, content to whisper and occasionally yell about her useless son who had abandoned her, and her beautiful boy who had made everyone proud. Occasionally she threw wide her cracked white lips and yellow teeth to bellow loudly for the house elf. This sorry creature looked, if possible, even more ancient than Draco's great-aunt. His greyish skin was paper-thin, and his bloodshot eyes were red-rimmed as he bowed and scraped to his mistress, bringing a polished silver tea service. Because Walburga had forgotten that she'd already asked for tea 3 times before, every available surface in the room now contained a piping-hot silver tea service. This annoyed Draco, because he had brought his sketchbook and brightly-coloured pencils with him, hoping to pass the time with drawing, for which he preferred to sit at a table. The alternative now was to try not to stare in open fascination and disgust at Walburga, who apparently had forgotten that she must close her mouth after she drank, resulting in a near constant dribble of brown tea down the front of her pink dress robes. Narcissa had had to remind him more than once not to stare at the frightening sight. Draco had not shared any of these disturbingly awful details with the rest of the Slytherin house. He'd only said that Sirius had been thought to be working for the other side, but was apparently a double agent who actually worked for the Dark Lord. Sirius had apparently given up Potter's parents after having won their trust. This information came not from Narcissa, who preferred not to involve herself in discussions of such dealings, but from Lucius. Lucius did not hold many members of the Black family in high regard, thinking them generally soft, what with Narcissa's relatives who had disgraced the family, others who had landed themselves at Azkaban after the Dark Lord had fallen, and Sirius's and Alphard's apparent treachery in going over to the other side. It was clear that Lucius did not fully subscribe to the Sirius as double agent idea, but he gleefully shared the handful of details he knew with Draco, who in turn shared them with his closest allies in Slytherin House. The Potter family had entrusted Sirius as the baby Potter's godfather. Then he had gotten the parents killed by the Dark Lord. He'd also killed one of their best friends, and a whole street full of muggles to boot. To be entirely honest, Black sounded as insane as Lord Voldemort to Draco, and he was glad not to have known him. It was assumed by most that Potter knew the entire truth about Black. Yet, when he brought up the subject with the bespectacled boy in class one day, Potter seemed clueless, as always. Draco was taking additional courses this year, as all third years were. He shared arithmancy and ancient runes with Hermione, enjoying the chance to see her away from her knuckle-headed duo for a change. He was surprised to see her doing poorly in divination, but as the weird Professor Trelawney noted, it was not a subject learned in books, and if there was one thing that Hermione Granger did, it was learn from books. Their occasional meetings in the library resumed within a few days of school commencing, at times slyly sneaking to each other's table to steal away a needed text for their shared classes, with a smirk and a pointed look. When Draco was stuck on a particularly difficult rune translation, he asked her for help, and they sat together, side by side, poring over the textbook for a glorious 20 minutes or so, during which Draco counted how many times their knees touched. 8. How many times their hands touched. 16. And how many freckles she had on her right cheek. 11. He paid closer attention to Hermione now. He noticed that when he absent-mindedly swept a hand through his platinum blonde hair, her eyes would often follow it. He saw that when he pointed out an item in the book, her eyes would follow his hands carefully. He noticed that when he ate a spearmint toad, she would lean into him more. He noticed that when he made a little joke, she would giggle, sometimes covering her mouth with her hand. If he said something funny or rude about one of her precious Gryffindors, she would grow stern, then angry, and her hair would seem to spark at the corners of his vision. He made an effort to do all of those things around her. He owled the Honeyduke's shop for a large canister of spearmint toads that Thorn struggled to carry. He started carding his fingers through his hair so much that it required washing twice daily. He read the text ahead to search for things to point out to her. And as he walked the corridors of the school, he thought of jokes and quips that would get some reaction, any kind of reaction, from her. One class he certainly was not enjoying was Care of Magical Creatures. This was upsetting because it was the class that Draco had looked forward to the most this year. In his younger years he'd obsessed over dragons and thunderbirds like most boys, of course, and he'd always loved walking out to the paddock behind Knott Manor and visiting the creatures therein. Pym's cousin Eustace worked there, and the four of them, the 2 boys and the 2 house elves, would brush the shiny unicorn coats and polish the saddles for the Abraxan horses for hours. Pym and Eustace would share funny stories about their families, occasionally singing elf kitchen songs in harmony. But by far his favourite magical creature was the one they started the school year studying in the Care of Magical Creatures class, and it had gone so sideways that Draco wasn't sure it would ever get back on track. Growing up, he had been fascinated with the hippogriffs in fairy tales and magical storybooks. Narcissa, who had many useful contacts in the wizarding world, had located Magical Circus on the outskirts of Bruges, Belgium, when he was 6. Too young for the back-to-back side-along apparitions that it would take to reach Belgium, he and Narcissa had flewed to the Standard Hotel near King's Cross. Then they boarded a muggle train for Dover. From there they took a boat across the Strait of Dover to Bruges. Then Narcissa did a quick side-along apparition with him to the Wizarding Circus. Narcissa introduced him to Igvad, the gameskeeper of the circus. They had stopped in to look at the animals, Draco taking a moment to admire the almost crystalline nature of the Demigeist's fur, to furrow his brow in confusion at the empty cage marked Thestral, until finally they had reached the hippogriff, Starclaw. The black and white dappled creature stood majestically in a corner of the tent. Igvad moved forward gently, holding Draco's hand, speaking in low, hushed tones to the hippogriff. Draco could not take his eyes off of the creature, and they stared at each other for what seemed like hours. Reaching up, he ran his fingers through the feathers at the hippogriff's neck, and the hippogriff leaned his neck into Draco's touch with what Draco recognized was happiness. Narcissa had bought him a fricandel and frites with mayonnaise, and they'd watched the magical circus from the top box, marveling at the amazing acrobats and dancers, oohing and awing as the animals became part of the spectacular show. At the end, Narcissa had purchased him a stuffed replica of the hippogriff, which she carried home proudly that night, naming it Carlton, because that's what he thought Igvad had said the creature's name was when they were first introduced, and Draco found this very funny. Now, as the first class with Hagrid began, the group was face to face with several large hippogriffs. Draco stared in awe, not realizing how many different colors they could be, how beautiful they could all be together. He thought of Starclaw and of how different his feathers and coat had been compared to these creatures. One in particular in the front looked as though Starclaw had been caught in a magical rain that had washed away all of the dark spots on his fur, leaving behind the pristine white. In Magical Creatures, Hagrid asked for volunteers to greet the hippogriffs, and Draco hung back, not wanting to seem overly eager. But when Potter volunteered, he was annoyed with himself for missing the chance. As Hagrid prattled on about the creatures that Draco already knew so well, his mind wandered back to Starclaw. Was he still in the circus? Had he seen all kinds of magical places? Igvard had said that the circus toured all over the continents, and that the following year they would go to America to tour. Draco silently marvelled at the places that Starclaw had likely seen. Potter was now climbing on the back of the beautiful white hippogriff, and Draco's jealousy burned. Not only was Potter getting to ride the creature, a prize that Draco had not even realized was in the mix of possibilities, but it was the white one, the one he hoped to study. Once Potter and the hippogriff came back, the rest of the crowd surged forward, eager to have a chance with the majestic creatures. Draco, followed by Vince and Greg, sauntered up just as Potter was dismounting and walking away on shaky legs. Draco caught the very end of Hagrid's warning to approach the creatures with caution. Starclaw had been such a sweet-tempered and gentle creature. Draco had been able to tell by looking in his eyes. As he approached this hippogriff, however, they locked eyes, and Draco could see that this one was different. There was a haughty, almost austere gleam in the beady black eyes. "I'll bet you're not dangerous at all, are you? You big ugly brute." Draco had meant it in a teasing way, but apparently this creature did not take well to teasing. It had reared back, striking Draco in the arm with its sharp talons, causing him to fall back into the dirt. His arm felt like it was on fire from the cut, and he could not help but scream out. The next few moments were a blur, as Draco felt himself bodily lifted from the ground, then being carried clumsily up the hill, back towards the castle. Voices followed him. He recognized Goyle and Pansy, and closer than them, Hermione. She appeared to be keeping pace with Hagrid, who was apparently carrying Draco. She was offering directions to Hagrid. "Try and keep his arm steady. I'll walk ahead and open the door for you. Take the back staircase because there's fewer stairs up to the hospital wing." Draco closed his eyes, allowing the rolling bounce of the oaf's gate to try and override the pain in his arm. After what seemed like only a few moments, he was deposited onto a cool bed, and Hagrid hurried away to find Madame Pomfrey. Draco opened his eyes to find the sun blocked by a hazy, golden-lit cloud of curls. Hermione had pulled up a chair close to his bed, and appeared to be pressing his forearm between her hands. Draco chanced a look down to see how bad the damage was, and was only a little bit surprised to see a bit of white cloth sticking out between her palm and his forearm. "A handkerchief can be a handy thing, right, Malfoy?" she said with a watery grin. Draco glanced up, surprised to see small tears glistening in the corners of her eyes. His sense of bravado overcame his feeling of pain. "Worried about me, Granger?" He tried a lopsided smirk, which turned into a wince as his forearm muscles flexed. "Yes, you prat. What are you thinking, insulting that hippogriff?" She blew a stream of breath upwards, causing the curls to flutter, then resettle out of her eyes for a moment. "I thought that we were safe. This was a class, after all." He looked down then, his head suddenly flooded with memories. Besides, the one hippogriff I knew before wasn't like that. He'd have never done that. Hermione gave a wry smile, then had to move suddenly to make room for Madame Pomfrey and Hagrid as they bustled back over, laden with bandages and potions. Hermione withdrew the white handkerchief, folding it so that the spots of blood weren't visible. She backed away slowly, making her way to the door. As she leaned against it, ready to leave, she looked back up and met his eyes. "Get better," she mouthed. Draco smirked and threw his good arm over his forehead as though reeling from intense pain, which, come to think of it, wasn't that far off from the actual truth. He had no idea what was in hippogriff talons, but It was certainly not all sunshine and rainbows. His entire arm, up to the shoulder, felt like it was on fire. When he glanced back at the door, she was gone, and he was able to drop the facade, now groaning in real pain. Draco had immensely enjoyed his return to classes after the hippogriff attack, forcing Weasley and Potter to do the meticulous handiwork required for his shrinking solution in potions class. In truth, his arm did still hurt slightly, and he had been told not to use it much by Pomfrey, so that the venom would not spread, but he likely could have done the work himself. But it gave him a chance to watch Hermione as she struggled to finish her own and Neville's solutions properly. After class, the moronic duo set off to the door of the classroom, muttering to each other angrily. Draco took an extra moment in packing up with his one good arm, noticing that Hermione was likewise falling behind her friends to pack up her multitudinous books and journals as well. Why the hell was she carrying all this? And had the witch never heard of a featherweight charm? As she went to exit the potions classroom, Draco caught up to her, reaching her just as they passed a small, recessed alcove, covered by a thin tapestry. "Granger," he muttered quietly, though apparently he still had startled her with his closeness. She turned, wide-eyed, and was suddenly pushing against him, backing him into the alcove. "What?" "Just wanted a bit of privacy. Feeling a bit better, Malfoy?" she asked with a knowing smirk. "I notice your solution was just the right shade of green. I'm sure in no small part to those perfectly cut daisy roots of Ron's." "That tosser was trying to sabotage me," Draco burst out defensively. Hermione chuckled, but didn't deny it. "And your handkerchief, Granger, were you able to salvage it? I'm sure your cleaning spells were adequate." "I preferred to clean it the muggle way," she answered, lowering her eyes and drawing the small white square from her cuff. "It may not have come out pristinely white, but it's clean. I find that Scourgify doesn't get everything off." "You could also try Tergio," he offered, and immediately wondered what the hell he was thinking, exchanging cleaning tips with Hermione Granger in a darkened alcove. He knew the older boys in Slytherin would tease him mercilessly that he took a witch into an alcove to discuss the proper way to clean something. "I don't know, it's kind of fun to leave a bit of a stain sometimes, you know? It kind of reminds you of what happened to get the stain, like a memory." She gave a half-smile and lifted her eyes to look into his. Was she saying that she wanted to be reminded of a memory with him in it? Draco's breath caught in his chest. "How's your arm?" Without warning, Hermione reached out to touch his arm. The sensation was of immediate sparking, like 100 tiny bolts of light travelling from his fingertips to his shoulder and down his spine. He shivered slightly. "Are you okay?" she asked quizzically, pulling back her hand uncertainly. Yes. Fine. I'm fine. My arm is not. It still hurts a little. Madame Pomfrey says to rest it." His voice trailed off, but he proffered his arm to her to inspect, wondering what the sensation had meant, and if it would happen again. But she'd put her hands on the strap of her backpack instead, smiling at him briefly. "That's good. And hopefully you've learned your lesson." "Yes. Don't go messing with the wrong sort." Draco smirked, his eyes mirthful, teasing. "Yes. Well, you certainly wouldn't want to be seen hanging around with the wrong sort, would you, Draco?" Draco had never heard his first name spoken by her voice before, and the lightning bolts returned, followed closely by a cold chill of understanding. "No, Granger, I didn't—" But she had turned on her heel, pushing quickly through the tapestry to leave him alone in the alcove. He reached after her with his injured arm, not thinking, hoping to pull her back into the alcove with him, to make her understand that that wasn't what he meant by the comment. His hand did not find her shoulder, instead closing around the edge of her nearly full to bursting backpack. He grasped at it briefly, feeling a small give as a few of the seams ripped, and then the bag was no longer in his fingertips. His arm ached dully, confirming that he really shouldn't have done that. He poked his head from behind the tapestry, but found nothing there. It was as if Hermione had disappeared into thin air. The following weekend was Halloween. Draco set off to Hogsmeade Village, happy to be out of the castle and into the crisp autumn air. He walked leisurely with Theo and Blaise, his eyes cutting occasionally over to Hermione and the Weasel, who walked together in close conversation. Were they talking about him? Did she like Weasley? Like, as a boy? Surely not. His mind scoffed back at him. What could she possibly see in the Weasel? He was poor, not very smart, a ginger, not a good flyer. Draco had more money than Merlin. His grades were nearly best in class. His hair was a superb colour, and he was an excellent flyer. There was no way the Weasel could compare. He frowned to himself. Wait, why did he care if his hair was better than Weasley's? He shook his head slightly as if to clear it. Draco and the others spent the day gorging on sweets and honeydukes and butterbeer, the three broomsticks. They tried out different jokes and trick items and zonkos, then spent an hour putting and chipping on the charmed green of the truly old course at St. Andrews, which predated the Muggles' old course by a century, at least. After a full day of jocularity and a delicious feast back at the castle, Draco thought of nothing more than turning in for a long night's rest. The older students were just getting started with their party, sipping butterbeers, fire whiskey, and spiced vodka, when the party atmosphere was broken by the clanging of the Bloody Baron's ghostly chains. "There has been an incident. Everyone, please return to the Great Hall." The silvery face of the Baron gave away nothing. He remained solemn and stoic as always, as he disappeared through the wall of the common room. "That guy really is creepy," Blaise commented. "I mean, I know he fits the aesthetic, the whole gloomy dungeon vibe we have going on down here, but truly, could they not assign us someone with a little more enthusiasm for life?" "Hard to have enthusiasm for life when you're dead, I guess," quipped Theo. "Yeah, I get the sense that he didn't have a whole lot of appreciation for the living, even when he was alive, considering how much blood he has on him. I highly doubt that's all his," Draco added ominously. The Slytherins made their way slowly back up to the Great Hall, whispering and wondering as they noticed the rest of the houses converging inside as well. It soon became apparent that there was an intruder, possibly Sirius Black, based upon the gossip moving slowly across the hall. Dumbledore cleared the tables away, explaining that everyone would need to spend the night here, under the watchful eye of the professors and prefects. Draco grumbled along with the rest of the Slytherins, but inside he felt like a bubble was about to burst in his chest. He had spotted Hermione across the room with the rest of the Gryffindors, and he surreptitiously gestured to his friends with a slight tilt of his head in the direction of the lion trio. "I want to hear what's going on, and I'm sure it involves Potter because of the whole Godfather thing," Draco explained. Theo followed along gamely, but it was hard to miss the knowing look in Blaise's eyes. Draco ignored this. What the hell did Blaise think he knew anyway? They settled a row down and away from Hermione, who was a row away from the idiot Potty and the Weasel. One by one, everyone around them seemed to drop off into sleep. Draco dozed as well, though he willed himself not to. He was determined to set things straight between himself and Hermione, and they didn't get many chances to speak, considering who her friends were. He awoke to catch the end of a quiet conversation between Professors Dumbledore and Snape, with that older Weasley prat nearby, trying to butt in. He rolled his eyes, only to find Hermione's eyes narrowed on him. "He's such a know-it-all," Draco mouthed to her, grinning. She narrowed her eyes even more, but seemed to smile in spite of herself. A few long minutes passed, and Draco caught the light snores of the weasel, as well as the steady, deep sleeping breaths of Potter behind Hermione. He lifted his head as discreetly as he could to see if she was still awake. At the movement, her eyes popped open as though she'd been waiting for it. I wanted to apologize. For the other day, I didn't mean to make you think that I meant you as the wrong sort. He exhaled dejectedly. But I am, aren't I? A mudblood, not fit to be respected. Dirt beneath your shoes. Her whisper was scathing. No, you're not. Not dirt, I mean. You're... Draco could feel his face heating. He didn't know how to finish this sentence. Quiet, please. The admonishing whisper of the older Weasley boy cut across the room, and Draco lowered his head, pretending to be asleep. After an agonizing 5 minutes, he slowly lifted his head again, but this time Granger's copper eyes were lidded. Her slow, even breaths caused her body to rise and fall in sleep. Percy the prefect had wandered back across the room, and everyone around was asleep. Draco leaned towards her sleeping bag, stopping about 2 feet from her ear. "You're perfect," he whispered, finishing his earlier sentence, certain she wouldn't hear it in her slumber. Draco moved back to his own sleeping bag, turning over to stare up at the cloudless, charmed sky of the ceiling above him. She was perfect. That's all there was to it. Her mind, her face, her laugh, even her insane hair. Why did things need to be so difficult? He knew that regardless of how he felt about Hermione, the rest of his family would certainly see her as dirt. Not that he had any plans in the foreseeable future to have her and them in the same room at the same time. The very idea seemed preposterous now that he thought of it. He sighed, closing his eyes. It really didn't matter. The chances of Hermione and his family interacting were slim to none anyway, thank Merlin. The next morning, Draco was one of the first to wake. He was greeted by a surprising sight. In the night, Hermione had worked the white handkerchief free from her jumper sleeve, pressing it to her cheek, sandwiching it between her face and hand. Her other hand reached off of her sleeping bag in his direction. He was sure the reaching hand was a coincidence. There was no way she'd been reaching for him in her sleep. But it would be hard for her to deny cuddling his handkerchief to her cheek. As he sat up and stretched, he saw her eyes stir behind her lids without opening, then slowly run the handkerchief down the side of her neck, stretching the stiffness out of her shoulder and neck. A small smile touched her lips before her eyes quickly popped open, as though suddenly hyper-aware that she was in a public space, not her own bed. He gasped as she looked around wildly, her hair growing even bushier as she did, and tucked the white handkerchief roughly back into her sleeve, out of sight. A trickle of realization dawned. Did she possibly sleep with the handkerchief against her cheek sometimes, like a favorite blanket or stuffed creature? Surely not. And yet, as their eyes met and Hermione's face turned a deep red, Draco had to wonder if he'd gotten it right in one. They both looked away quickly, but not before exchanging the smallest of smiles. Thank you for listening to this chapter of The Handkerchief by Great 78.